All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, August 28th, 2023, and it's my pleasure to call to order the Policy and Innovation Committee of SACOG, the Sacramento Area Council of Government. So good morning to the directors and to the public that are here with us. So Robert, may we have the housekeeping messages, please?
There are actually no housekeeping announcements today.
Well, excellent. Wonderful. Well, with that, let's just start with a Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. Hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Excellent. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Desmond, absent. Dowden Calvillo, absent. Howdeshelt.
Here.
Zaragoza.
Here.
Schaefer, absent. Vega for Stollard.
Present.
Vang, absent. Villegas.
Here.
Vice Chair Burris.
Here.
And Chair Thomas.
Here. Thank you. And I'd like to give a warm welcome to Director Viega. We're delighted to have you as an alternate from Woodland. So thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday.
Pleasure to have you here. I see Director Howdeshelt's hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you very much, Supervisor and Director Thomas. I just wanted to acknowledge that August 28th, Roseville lost Marine Corps Sergeant Nicole G, along with 12 others in this suicide bombing in Kabul. And this morning there was a dedication in Roseville to her and a street dedicated in her honor.
Oh, thank you for that. Appreciate knowing that. All right. Are there any other public communications, Roberts?
There's no other public comment.
All right, excellent. We'll now move into the consent calendar, which is rather robust. Are there any comments or questions from any director on our consent calendar? No? All right. Is there any public comments on the consent calendar?
There's no public comment.
Okay. Does any director wish to make a motion on it?
Burris moves approval.
Zaragoza second.
All right. Burris moves. Zaragoza second. Roll call, please.
Directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Desmond, absent. Dowden Calvillo, absent. Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Zaragoza.
Aye.
Schaefer, absent. Vega for Stollard.
Aye.
Vang.
Yes.
Villegas.
Yes.
Vice Chair Burris.
Aye.
And Chair Thomas.
Aye, thank you. Well, we were very efficient with our official business this morning and in terms of using the consent calendar, but now we'll get into really a critical part of our agenda this morning, and that is our advocacy update, as there's a lot of items that are of critical importance to SACOG and our member regions. So good morning, Christina.
Good morning. Thank you. We've got both our state and our federal lobbyists joining us today to give us some updates. We'll start on the federal side, and then we'll move to the state to get an update on our sponsored bill. So first, we've got Jason Pavlicek and Devin Barnhart, who are going to give us an update on what's happening in DC.
Great.
Hi all.
Morning, Jason. Good morning. See, where are you?
I'm Devin. Here I am.
Oh, there you go, Devin. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Happy to do so. And just to give you guys, I'm going to start with a brief overview of what's been happening in DC. But the big thing we're focused on today are grants. As you all know, there's been a lot of federal money going out the door. So we just want to give you an update on where things stand, what's happening now, and where the grant's going, and then a big picture overview of what's happening on the funding side for the federal government. Just as a reminder, Jason Pavlicek and I'm Devin Barnhart. We're SACOG's federal advocates in Washington, D.C., and we're transportation nerds from way back, and we really focus on the federal side of that transportation piece. I think we maybe did 5 or 6 of these presentations on what was in bipartisan infrastructure law. So this slide may look familiar. It's an oldie, but a goodie. This was the largest infrastructure package that has passed to date. It was $550 billion, focused on a whole host of transportation. And there was also some water, energy, and other funding in there, but the bulk of it was a lot of transportation. The second package that Congress funded was called the IRA. This is really their climate funding law. This is also the biggest investment in climate that Congress has ever passed. You'll see down in the bottom corner, you'll see the tiniest circle says transportation and infrastructure. We got a very small piece of this because so much of bipartisan infrastructure law had focused in the transportation space, but many of the elements of the clean energy piece and the air pollution pieces, as well as clean fuels and vehicles, obviously all overlap with transportation. Just to highlight some of the pieces that are in that $7 billion range, that those were focused on transit, primarily through the EV bus piece, switching to zero emission buses, and then the reconnecting communities, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This is the host. This may also look familiar. This is the host of the bulk of the grants that are discretionary. What I mean by the word discretionary is that communities can apply, states, communities, MPOs, and for the most part, can apply for these grants rather than them flowing directly to the states. As you all know probably by now, most of the federal money that comes for transportation goes right to the state, and then some gets dispersed to MPOs. This last bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law, really changed the dynamic to give communities and other entities more access to federal dollars directly. And so there are a lot of grants. And what that means is it can get pretty confusing because so many grants are opening and closing frequently. There's different applicants and different eligibility. So there is a lot to unpack in these grants, and it's a heavy lift for folks when they apply for them and to implement them. The current landscape, what the federal government has been doing over the last couple of years is getting these grants up and running out the door. For the bulk of the grants, we've seen the first round, some we've seen the second round, but we're really in the mix. Most of these grants have 5 years of funding, and then some of them have like a big plus up year because the IRA money went out in 1 year. And so we're in an important phase of the grants because we know what to expect now. We know how they're going to be administered for the most part. And so now it's really like focusing on what the priorities are and how to move them through the various grant cycles. So just to give you a sense, the two, I'm going to start with the two on the left-hand side because those grants just recently closed. The mega projects, infra and rural, the upper left-hand corner, that is supposedly the big project pot. That funding was around $5.5 billion. Sorry, my son is home today. You can hear him yelling at his dad in the background. That was around a $5 billion pot spread over those 3 different grant programs. That one just closed. And then the Protect grants on the bottom side, those Protect grants are meant to be climate protection grants. So they're looking at a whole host of different eligibilities dealing with how we protect our infrastructure. That one also just closed. We'll be seeing that Protect grants. This is the first time we have seen it. So we'll see as those project comes out, like what they're looking for in the scope of those projects. But it's the first time those grants have been in place. And then the 3 that are open right now, SMART grants, those are technology-focused grants. So they want to the department wants to be able to advance technologies, not ones that are new and untested, and not ones that are everywhere. So these are like middle of the pack grants. This is really like, how can we solve a problem in our communities with a little bit of seed money? It's about $100 million grant. There's some for planning. There's some for implementing. Those grants are open through October. One of the big things, this is a theme Jason and I will talk about, but one of the big things we saw with the SMART grant today is that they really focused on regional projects. So they had 8 or 9 applications that sort of look similar. They bulked all those communities together into one larger grant and did a big grant in order to see how it was different across communities. So thinking through all of these grants, how the department's looking at it is important because they are really doing this regional focus on how can we get the biggest bang for our buck on the federal dollar. The TOD pilot program at the bottom, right? This is an important project, particularly in communities that have a lot of transit, where you want to build more dense development around existing transit services. This TOD pilot grant allows for more planning. And this is a big priority. It's a small pot of money, but it's a big priority for the department. And they're trying to bake in more and more TOD throughout all the grants. So this is going to be interesting to see where they're spending their focus. And then I would say the most important for what SACOG is doing and for what a lot of local communities are looking at is this Reconnecting Communities pot. This is one of the grants that I mentioned that is has extra money this year. There's 5 years of funding for the base funding, but this year there's a very extra big pot. I know that doesn't exactly make sense, but they added money in IRA that's just 1 year money. So this year the IRA money is going out and the bipartisan infrastructure law is coming out, and they combined the money into one group to make a sort of a mega pot of Reconnecting Community money. Reconnecting Communities when it started, it was really focused on infrastructure that divided communities. So think highways that segregated communities, rail lines, and many of the projects that were initially discussed focused around capping a highway, for instance, to restore the grid, or providing access to communities that had traditionally been cut off. The program has morphed to a broader set of things that might cut off communities. So you might have segregation on climate, where one portion of a community is really being hit by various climate factors. That also all gets encompassed in Reconnecting Communities. They also, in the IRA, gave some funding for safety. So this is a broader pot than just Reconnecting Communities, but the big focus is how can we improve our communities, give more people access. One of the most interesting and exciting things about this program is that they set aside $450 million out of the big pot. I think the pot was, blanking on what the total number was. I think it was like 1.5 billion, and they took about a third of it to put towards regional projects. So they really want to look at how can we solve a regional problem within the scope of these eligibilities. And so this is something that should be really exciting to MPOs, and something that SACOG is looking at as we consider our grant opportunities that we're going to apply for, because it's going to hit on all the things that we're trying to accomplish, particularly when we're looking at Green Means Go. So that is the bulk of the ones that are have just closed or just about to close. And then Jason's going to flag some of the ones that are coming up down the line, just so you have a sense of what's coming over the next quarter.
Thanks, Devin. Yeah, there are a handful of grants that will be coming through for, in some cases, the second time, and in one or two cases, the first time. The first I want to focus on, or the first two I want to focus on, are the Congestion Relief Program. This is a $50 million a year program designed explicitly only for metropolitan regions over 1 million. So there are only 54, I believe, 54 or 55 metropolitan areas that can apply. And this program is primarily for ITS, Intelligent Transportation Systems, transportation demand management, pricing type programs. So generally speaking, like road construction, capital expansion of transit are not allowed. This congestion relief program is really based upon using optimizing transportation systems. I think the lone exception is the money can be used to build and develop hot lanes and express lanes. What is interesting about this program, again, is it's only open to those areas over 1 million. What they will likely do is, because this is the first time they will release this grant program, they will likely combine at least 2 years. It's possible they will combine 3 years, meaning there will be about $150 million available, between $100 and $150 million available for this grant program. And also the grant size. The minimum grant size is $10 million. So I think what we're going to see here is a lot of, very, very large and innovative TDM, ITS, and pricing type projects, things that you guys as a region and then individually are all certainly very much engaged in. The one thing I will mention is that the way the legislative language was written is that while the money is specifically designed to go to large metro areas, it can go to entities that have a population less than 1 million, as long as that entity is within a metropolitan statistical area, that is 1 million. So if, for example, the community of West Sacramento, and I'm just pulling anything out of my hat, wanted to apply for a grant to do X, Y, and Z, it could, because West Sac is a part of the larger MSA of Sacramento. Certainly, though, to sort of reiterate a program or point that Devin made, is that they're certainly looking for projects of regional significance. So certainly the project sponsor could be a smaller entity within a larger MSA, but they want to make sure that the project itself has regional implications. So certainly that's what their focus is. And again, this is another one of those programs where DOT is looking for multiple solutions to be combined as well. It doesn't have to be just one gigantic project. It can be a set of solutions, a carpool incentive program, along with signalization, along with a transit-oriented corridor. It can be a lot of different things put together into one package. So we expect that early in Q3, sometime September, October. Secondary to that is also a new program, but it's not really new. It's just been renamed a ton of times. This is the Strategic Innovation for Revenue Collection. It used to be called STSFA. I believe SACOG has been a part of some programs and grants that Caltrans has operated. And this is what it sounds like. This is Congress, what is now for, I think, the 16th year, looking at ways to test road user charging or other ways to get away from the gas tax. What is interesting about this program is that the old STSFA program and the old RUC, road user charging programs that used to come out of DOT, were primarily aimed at state DOTs. This program itself, they have opened a door. MPOs and other municipal governments can apply. They're also looking at more than just the technology behind it. Certainly the technology is there to look at VMT and to measure those things without having go to through a gas tax system. What they're also looking for here is what role road user charging has on users. It can be behavioral changes. It can be privacy issues. It can be a lot of different things that are sort of behind the curtains of going to road user charging. And that is why MPOs and local governments are available. So certainly something that should be looking at. Moving on, the Attain program. This used to be called ATC MTD. It is very similar to the Smart Grants program. The difference is the Smart Grants that Devin mentioned, every grant recipient has to go through a tier 1 planning phase and a tier 2 implementation phase. The Attain grants are specifically for deployment of innovation. There's a wide variety of eligible projects, everything from signalization down to electrification, and everything in between. But basically, how can innovation and technology solve real-world transportation problems? There's $60 million available. They're legally limited to the number of projects they can select from that, which means that usually the projects will be between $1 and $12 million. It's my guess that later on down the line of this legislative grant program, the Attain grants will be sort of co-opted by the Smart City grants, and more of the Attain money will go to implementation of Smart City grants. But for right now, you don't have to have been through a phase 1 of the Smart program to receive this money. Any city can apply for it for whatever reason they want. And then looking at some of the grants that are coming back up again, the RAISE grants, the Bridge grants, and the CRISI grants, which are our rail. Those grant programs will all be made available later this fall, early winter. Obviously, the RAISE program is the catch-all capital program. I don't think I need to go into what bridge grants are. And certainly with the Chrissy program, that is aimed towards rail improvement programs. And then the final program that's coming.
Just to jump in right before you do climate, one thing to flag
Yeah.
on the bridge grant, a lot of folks have gotten excited about the bridge grant program, but I will just flag for people, it tends to be a mega bridge grant program. So they only selected 4 projects in the last round. We'll see how that goes in future years, but it tends to be like the big name bridges that get selected in that process. So as communities think about the types of projects they might want to apply for in different grants, this is a tough pot unless it was a massive sort of bridge project. So anyhow, just want to flag that.
Yeah, the bridge over State Route 38 probably is not going to receive the same priority as the Golden Gate Bridge. However, it's very possible to that point that, there was a lot of criticism about the bridge program that only funded a few projects. There were a lot of unhappy senators that wanted to see their bridge over Route 38 funded. So we'll see how the reaction of that is the next time around. The final program is coming up, and there actually will be, I believe it'll be in the first week or 2 of September, are the climate pollution grants. This actually came from the IRA bill that Devin mentioned, the second sort of tranche of money. The climate pollution grants come out, it's about a little over $5 billion. A portion of those grants will come through the planning process that the state of California did. And then a portion which are just, were reserved for urban areas. And if you recall, a few months ago, there was a notice, and every large urban area had to designate, sort of an organizer regionally. And I believe it was the Sacramento Air Quality District was the region's sort of quarterback, for a lack of better words, with football season less than 2 weeks away. So those, they organized the plan, they developed the potential list of projects. Now what we'll see coming in a few weeks is the first and likely only competition for those urban dollars, and then the list of projects that were on and developed by Air Quality District will now get submitted and be eligible to receive some of that money. And again, the state has a portion of that money as well that they will set and compete. So there was, with the climate pollution grants, there was phase 1, which is get all the teams together and have them plan what the priorities are regionally. And now those plans that were developed, the projects on those plans will now compete nationally for the dollars that will come out. And that's the grants that are coming up. I will say the only thing about the grant calendar is that it's been pretty steady the first 2 years, where we know that RAISE will likely be announced in December, and we know sort of the ebb and flow. With the election next year, it is very likely that many of the grants notices will be a little bit earlier. So bus facility, for example, which is the big transit capital project, one of them, usually gets noticed in February, and then the projects get announced late spring, early summer. My guess is some of that will back up a little bit. It'll be January instead of February, or maybe late December, largely because, again, as we get closer to the election, there's generally sort of a period of time where, typically speaking, grant announcements are not made, in October. It has been the policy. I don't know if that will change. But also at the same time, you also see a lot of people leaving the administration to go and do political activities. So the herd gets thin a little bit. And I can tell you right now, with all these grant dollars and the government in general, the herd's pretty thin to begin with. So even if you lose 10% of your workforce, the grant process is slowed down to a near halt. So I think you're going to see a lot of the calendar expedited a little bit in the early part of 2023. And also, I think a lot of candidates want to run around this time next year and point to the bridge, the road, the what have you, the sidewalk, the bus. I think I've covered all my modal needs, and say, this is what I've done. So to that point, I think I'm going to cover. Devin and I flipped, and I always end up getting the wrong side of this when I have to cover some of
Wait.
the more
All right.
controversial news
No, not yet.
of
Jason. Hold on.
appropriations.
Just hold
Oh,
on.
well, I'm not there yet. Okay, good.
Okay, just one last thing. I forgot to include one grant, but I do want to just flag it very quickly. It's a HUD grant. We don't normally cover housing grants, but I do want to talk about it just very quickly. It is a new grant. It's about $85 million. We expect it'll be continued year after year through the appropriations process. But want to flag it just because it's really interesting for those who are trying to do better housing combined with your transportation and land use. It's called PRO, but it stands for Pathways to Removing Obstacles to Housing, and it has really broad eligibility for folks. So if anybody's used to using CDBG dollars for things, PRO has very similar eligibilities to that pot of money. This is its first round. We just have seen sort of the background on it, but could be really interesting given all the things you guys are trying to do in the region to support more housing. And the first round will close at the end of October, but again, I think we'll see it year after year, so it's not a one and done program. But it's one that we're keeping an eye on since it has sort of a fun overlap with a lot of the work that we're doing. And then one other quick thing to flag. Why isn't it going forward? Oh, I just want to flag this. Jason and I with SACOG have offered to many of the communities in the region to help support, provide technical assistance as they're working through the grant process. And just a couple of things to flag because we talk with a lot of the communities. These are the major priorities of this particular administration. They asked to see these objectives in every single grant, but particularly they focus on equity and inclusion. They focus on safety and really just trying to give more people access to the system, and then climate across the board. But what's worth noting for folks is they've released a new equity map. So for all of the grants that folks are applying for, there's a map that shows you sort of which communities do they consider distressed under their analysis. Being in those communities can help your grant application to do better because they try to make sure that 40% of the money is going to distressed communities. It can also have other benefits like you won't have a local match in certain grant programs. So it's worth understanding how any of the projects interact with their equity map. And then just to focus for all of these, the department is really risk averse, right? They want to see projects that are going to get done, that have broad support, and that have a real impact. I think I said bang for the buck earlier, but that really is what they're looking for with that federal dollar. And so almost all of the programs and certainly all of the objectives are trying to understand what is the regional benefit of that, particularly when you're looking at climate. Having climate benefits on one singular project is nice, but having regional climate benefits is really what they're looking to get at. So for any of the projects that you all are thinking about or thinking about through SACOG, this is a big place where we spend a lot of focus in order to meet the department's goals. All right, that's it on the grant piece. Jason, back to you on all the fun news that exists in the world.
Awesome. So I'm going to try to do this in a minute and a half or less. This is the annual federal appropriation fight. Republicans want to spend less. Democrats want to spend a little bit more than less, I guess is the best way to say it. Back in April and May and June, if you recall, Congress, near the brink of financial doomsday, if you listen to some, that related to the fiscal cliff, that, our debt ceiling, we had been reached, it needed to be increased. And a part of that was a binding resolution that created budgetary caps that, both parties agreed a reduction in spending to basically flatline a little bit less than FY 2023 spending levels, closer to FY 22. That passed Congress. The initial reaction was, great, this appropriation season will be easy. Someone should have knocked on wood. Republicans, specifically Freedom Caucus members, were not pleased with that result. They went with it. In some cases they didn't. but they have since stalled action on the House floor and demanded and received from Speaker McCarthy that while the caps were established, there's no obligation to spend to the cap. The appropriation bills that have come out of the House, or at least out of the House committees, are drastic spending, closer to what the position was that the House had prior to the debt ceiling fight. Now, the Senate is following effectively the budget ceiling caps. What is interesting about this fight is that it is really the fight below the fight. Normally we would go into this sort of time of tug, push and pull, and at some point it would be inevitable that a deal would get made and life goes on. The difference here is that the fiscal conservatives of the Republican Party, the far right wing or the right wing of the Republican Party, is almost itching for this fight. Many of them wanted to go over the debt ceiling. They wanted to fall over the fiscal cliff. When they were convinced that that would be economically disastrous, now that the thought is, well, then we'll shut down the government. If we cannot get dramatic spending cuts, we are willing to shut down the government. And Kevin McCarthy, if you're not willing to go along with us, we will oust you as Speaker. So that is the current position that Speaker McCarthy is in. He certainly is not in a position to negotiate with Democrats now, because it will ultimately, or it could, lead to him losing his speakership. And certainly the positions that are coming out of the House, they can't even pass the House because moderate Republicans will not agree to either the spending caps or the social policy behind it. So really what we're getting onto is a tug of war that is less between Republicans and Democrats and more when will Speaker McCarthy sort of figure out his end game. All that said, transportation by and large is already guaranteed funding. So there's not a lot on our plate that is at risk. The difference is Amtrak and capital investment grants, which comparatively the funding levels are at 2003 and 2004 respectively in the House bill. Those are non-starters with the Senate. So, it's really not a question of will it be doomsday? It's a question of, what path will Speaker McCarthy choose? And then will the government shut down? And if so, for how long? So there's a lot in the air, but at this point, it looks from a transportation perspective to be more of a nuisance than any actual danger. We will certainly keep you guys in the loop as things progress, but that is the current state of play. And it looks like for now, there will be an extension, a CR, at the end of this month. How long is to be determined.
Yeah,
So
the
with
one thing
that, we will
about
stop.
this
We
is
went way over time.
this isn't the first time this has happened. It's not the last time it'll happen. Everyone sort of knows how to deal once we get to this level of brinkmanship. But what is worth noting is there will be a lot of press on it and a lot of stories, but it's just something everyone has to get through because that's the current state of politics. So we'll be tracking it. It's particularly the one place where it may impact things. It might slow down grants. So if folks are in line to get grants, if staff aren't in the building, it can slow down the grant process for actually getting those implemented. So we try to track that and make sure that there's, we know all the places where it could impact actual projects moving forward. But for the most part, it's taking place at a much higher level than any of our pay grades. And
I think
that's
the one difference this time, though, is that, as Jason said, we've never had a speakership be on the line while you're going through the brinkmanship of continuing resolutions. So it does add an additional layer that we don't normally see. And this
there's
is
a lot of layers going on right now that we have never seen before that are
this is a
impacting.
problem for Kevin regardless. I mean, it's going to be his problem every single year, as long as
Good news is as these shutdowns go, it ends up being pretty bad news for everyone involved. Like there tend not to be huge political winners from it. And so there is this underlying impetus to not have everyone continue to sort of bleed in the process of getting it done. So it might be ugly, but they're going to have to fund the government at some point.
And then throw an election year into the mix of things, and that really complicates it. So,
It keeps everyone writing articles and a lot of press happening. Keeps us busy trying to babysit it for sure.
well, Devin and Jason, thank you so much for this very comprehensive update at the federal level. There is a lot going on. It continues to be incredibly fluid, and I don't think that's expected to change in the near future. So we really appreciate you helping us be on top of it. I see Director Huddeschelt's hands raised. You're up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Thomas. Devin, a real simple question on your first slide. There was something transit ever. So I was trying to figure out what the EVER acronym was, or is it an acronym?
I think it was excitement. It wasn't an acronym. It was the
Okay.
biggest increase in transit funding ever.
Okay, all right. I was thinking maybe it might be EV environmental restoration. I
I
don't.
should have put exclamation points, but yes, you're right. Given the number of acronyms, that's a fair question.
Can you just said something about this program for removing obstacles? Devin?
Do you,
Yeah.
Go
Yeah, so there's 85 million there?
there's 85 million there, and it was focused on it was originally called YIMBY, which is Yes in My Backyard, focused on creating policies to increase housing. The actual program itself is sort of much broader than what was initially. It's not just focused on communities improving their regulations for more housing, but gives a whole host of infrastructure developments that can happen as well. And happy to send something around if it's of interest to folks.
Yeah, just we have some of us have a pro housing designation out of the state, so it might line up real well. So, and then I guess the last question is related to, the environmental on the budget side of it. A lot of projects, whether they're managed lanes or not, are dependent upon, environmental work. So just, now or in the future, figure out how much at risk the Senate's budget proposal in Interior is at risk. So thank you, Chair Thomas.
All right, thank you for your comments. Are there any other director comments or questions? James, would you like anything to add anything to the federal side?
Thanks, Chair Thomas. Yeah, just real quick to round this out. Just a heads up for the board, and Devin and Jason always do a great job summarizing all these grant programs. There are a number that we have been working very closely on with Devin and Jason and all of our local partners, your staff. One is reconnecting communities, so that was the big plus up that's coming. We are I think, I hope as you all know, trying to figure out federal funding opportunities for Green Means Go. And that is one that we are going to go forward and put an application in on. And we're working with a number of jurisdictions on that. So that's great. I'm glad Director Huddeschelt mentioned the program, because that is certainly one we have been tracking and we're very excited about for this entire region. And then finally, the climate pollution reduction grant, stay tuned on that as well. Jason mentioned the Sac Metro Air District is kind of in the lead on that, but we do think there's a lot of opportunity there for Green Means Go. And then finally, just we've got 5 PROTECT applications in for that grant program, and at least that we know about. Those are the ones that requested letters of support. So thank you to all of those who did request the letter and requested it with a good amount of time for us to review it. There may be others, and that whole, so many grant programs with so much money that's kind of, rising over this next year. It's going to be really important that we're going to continue to talk to you and the full board about a sort of a broader grant strategy where we can really try to put our regional priorities forward. We can get a good sense of who's got what application in for which program, so that things like Cap to Cap next spring can be even more successful. Thanks.
Excellent. And James, I have a question either for you or Devin. The federal map of distressed communities was Devin mentioned. Where might we see that? Where is that available?
We'll send the link around.
Oh, that would be great. I think we'd all appreciate seeing that. Great. Thank you so much. All right. So with that, Christina, what's happening at the state side?
Thanks. And we've got one of our lobbyists, Chris Lee with Politico Group, who's on here today, and he'll give us an update primarily focused on our sponsored bill, AB 350.
Tell us the good news, Chris. Hi.
Thank you, Supervisor Thomas. Good morning, everybody. Don't know what's going on with my light. Okay. We are in appropriation season here in Sacramento. So the big deadline that bills all face that have a fiscal impact is to get out of the Appropriations Committee by the end of the week. The good news for our sponsored bill, AB 350, is that we are reported out of the Appropriations Committee. The Senate has a rule: if a bill doesn't have a significant fiscal impact, the chair can just report it directly to the Senate floor. So that's what happened when the file notice for this morning's appropriation hearing went out. So we're out of appropriations, onto the floor, and then really just continuing to work on some final pieces with the administration. So in the Appropriations Committee, we took 2 amendments. They were authors' amendments that we'd been working on with stakeholders throughout the process. And the first was related to incorporating SACOG's work under the RAISE grant into the next SCS update. So that's one of the reasons we'd been talking about throughout the process, why we wanted to extend the time frame. And so the Environmental Quality Committee, as well as the Air Resources Board, did want to make sure that for the update, there was a specific statutory requirement to include that work. It's stuff you all were working on anyway, and we really wanted to demonstrate the importance of that work. We're not just asking to push the deadline out, for no reason. We really want to do a better job with the SCS update, including through incorporating that approach in the communities that you're working with through the RAISE grant. The second piece that was included in those authors' amendments in appropriations was something else that we'd been talking about throughout the process. And this is just really a reporting requirement. So if you saw the bill from the San Diego Area Council of Governments a few years ago, that's something that was included in there. That was AB 1730. So I think we knew we were going to have some sort of reporting to check in on the progress of basically what's happening on the ground compared to what are we projecting will happen in the Sustainable Community Strategy. CARB initially asked for a lot more detail, certainly than what was included in the SANDAG bill, and a lot more detail than what we ultimately negotiated in the amendment that was taken. So we did a lot of work, not just internally with SACOG staff, making sure that the level of data was consistent with things we're already tracking and was going to be feasible to implement, but also with other stakeholders in the region that have, in the past expressed concerns about similar reporting language. So we were happy to land something there to make everyone comfortable on that front. I've heard back, we wanted to take the amendment in appropriations because it's the item that turns this into potentially a reimbursable mandate. So we didn't want to take an amendment on the floor that would trigger a re-referral to appropriations. And so nailed that down with stakeholders and have heard from CARB that they think the language is acceptable as well. So that's where we're at in terms of the current state of the bill. So it's going to move on to the floor. One hiccup that I think we've encountered, and it's something that we sort of expected, but also, we understand that the timing of this bill is important. We can't have the SCS go into a non-compliant status. So when we set out with the bill, our assumption was that we were going to keep the housing element timeline on the 8-year cycle, and rather than pushing it out into the future and making the current cycle, where almost every jurisdiction in the SACOG region already has a compliant housing element, longer. So HCD wasn't comfortable with that approach, and so what we've done in the interim, and I understand it's not ideal, but there's so many stakeholders involved, and we didn't go through the housing policy committees because the bill didn't change the housing element timeframe. But some of the stakeholders, including the housing committee staff and chair in the Senate, had concerns with the language that HCD had proposed about the housing element timeframe. And so what we've landed on is basically extending the current SCS timeframe and giving us some room to work with HCD, to work with housing stakeholders, and come back and figure out how we're going to realign that. Really just wanted to make sure, we're not in a position to have the bill fail, frankly. And so that's what, given the political circumstances that we were under and kind of where we're at in the process, are looking at that as kind of the interim solution. And I know, SACOG staff have some thoughts about how important getting this extension is, and really why we felt that we had to kind of come to a compromise position with HCD rather than testing our luck with a potential veto. And so I don't know, Christina, I don't know if Clint wanted to speak to that a little bit, or we have any questions before we go to him.
Any further comments on that? Either Clint or Christina? No. Okay.
I think maybe Clint was going to give us just a little bit of a reminder on what some of the consequences are if we don't get this extension, just to put in context why we're working to address some of these issues from CARB and HCD.
And Chair Thomas, you have Director Villegas with us.
Yes, I see that. Great. All right. So Clint, do you have anything extra to add before we move on to director questions?
I can just be very brief. I think the main thing we wanted to communicate on the importance of making sure we keep our SCS in compliance. So the importance of getting this bill that is the kind of the key to making sure we stay eligible for SB1 funding programs. So there's a handful of the programs: the Congested Corridors Program, the Trade Corridors Program, and then the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program, which our region competes in all of those. Those are in statute. You have to have a plan or an SCS that meets the greenhouse gas target to be eligible for those programs. And our region, since those started, we've received over $500 million from those programs. So that is a pretty critical set of programs. And then there's also some funding in the local partnership program that your agencies go after, and then also some formula funds that come to SACOG for helping create the SCS. They're not in statute, but they're in guidelines that you need to have your SCS. So there's quite a few programs with quite a bit of money on the line that really make this an important bill for us.
That's so true. A lot at stake. Director Villegas, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, not a question, just a statement. It also is not a horrible thing that the author, while it wasn't the case when the legislation was initiated, she's now Speaker Pro Tem. So it's not a horrible thing for the author to be in this position and a good friend of SACOG. So
it's true. Yeah. Thank you for that. You're so right. I do have a question that is especially when we're looking at the housing element and how that may or may not transform with this legislation. How are we engaging with our cities and counties as part of the SACOG region in that? Are we keeping them updated on where this is going, or when this is all said and done, then we'll help them adjust the housing element?
I think that's another reason why, given the time when the concern was raised, we got a proposed amendment from HCD on July 24th and started vetting it with the relevant folks the next day. And basically the upshot of HCD's amendment is that it would have pushed out that housing element timeframe by 2 years. And so we had started with the approach of, we're going to keep it on the 8-year cycle, figure out kind of administratively how to make that work with the new SCS timing. And so we didn't really have time under what HCD was proposing to have a full conversation with everyone around the region, which is, I think, another reason why we elected to pursue this alternative strategy where we keep the timing of things the same. That gives us a few years to figure out and have that broader regional conversation, not just with the jurisdictions, but also with stakeholders and the advocacy community, with home builders, with others.
That makes sense. So pretty much status quo right now until otherwise noticed in terms of housing element. Okay, great. Any other director comments or questions on this? Great. Well, there's a lot going on, and we do appreciate the thorough update. All right, so any other matters for the good of the order? Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Devin and Chris and Jason. We appreciate the update. So, James, do you have anything else to add for this afternoon?
No, just that, this is that time of year where the Policy Innovation Committee happens a week early because of Labor Day. And so our other two committees will be next Thursday. So you've gone much earlier, which is fine. We are still trying to do a virtual lunch in between those two committees. We're securing speakers on pricing and tolling, which, as you know, is going to be is currently a very active and important and hot topic. We've spent some time with committees, with the board, the Strategic Planning Committee in August on pricing and tolling and toll lanes, and we're hoping, so just stay tuned, it'll be in my executive director update probably next week, but just do hold that time if you can. Even obviously anybody, any board member or any member of the public can attend. It's an extension of the Transportation Committee next Thursday at noon.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. And so with that, the next Policy and Innovation Committee meeting will be Monday, October 2nd. And we will see you at the SACOG board meeting prior to that. So thank you all. Happy Monday and wish you a happy and successful week. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.